All right, welcome to Capital Consumption Theory. I'm Eddie, and today we have Zach and Brian with us, and we are going to talk about productivity growth um, and jobs and automation. So this week we had some articles um, from we had an article from Noah Smith this week called Andrew Yang's Ideas Are Better Than You Think. And we also had a tweet from James Medlock, which is similar. So I'm going to share a little quote from this article. Uh, so, uh, okay, so it says, but replacing a job um, shouldn't be the goal for unconditional cash benefits. Instead, the purpose of unconditional cash is to grease the wheels of capitalist life. So I think this is correct. And I think this is a very important point because a lot of critics of UBI will say, $1,000 a month is not enough to live on. So they say, well, you're going to put this UBI in, and then all the jobs are going to disappear, and then everybody will be super, super poor living on $1,000 a month. And that's absolutely not what would happen because this is a very basic thing. When you put in the UBI income of $1,000 a month, that does not suddenly cause all the jobs to disappear. In fact, if anything, what it causes to happen is it causes a great deal of spending in the economy to happen, and with that spending, you would actually get more labor demand. You would actually get more jobs and better jobs. So I think this is one very important point that he gets right. Um, and he goes on to say that we need those robots and that the rise of the robots is a very common fear that people have. In fact, workers have been afraid of being replaced by machines for centuries. This kind of ties into what James Medlock says, so I'm going to show this tweet also. So James Medlock this week on a tweet says, "It's funny to me to see someone complain simultaneously that UBI would make labor scarce, one, and two, cause automation that makes jobs scarce. While both claims are probably overstated, it sounds like it solves the problem it creates." So, some critics are saying, well, if you give people UBI, then nobody's going to want to work. You won't have enough labor. And then other people are saying, or sometimes the same people are saying, um, if you put in UBI, then that will cause all the jobs to be automated. And it's a similar logic here that you want to be very clear about, which is what causes what and what is not affected. So for instance, automation of jobs, um, that's occurring now. That has been occurring for the last 40 years, or even for the last 300 years. The automation and the productivity growth happens regardless if you have a UBI or not. And
And that's
so,
that's one clarification I'd like to make is that
yeah,
when we talk about automation, I think a lot of times we miss the part that is productivity growth. Is that when we think of automation, we think of one person losing their job specifically,
yeah,
like when the car parts go from the assembly line being all workers um, to all robots. But I think when we what we miss from a lot of that is the productivity gains where it's not one worker getting displaced. It's instead of having uh, a fry cook, a hamburger maker, and a uh, front office ringer at McDonald's, now you only have somebody who can do hamburgers and fries at the same time. And instead of having three, you go to two. And instead of having five, you go to four. And when you do that throughout the entire economy, it leads to less labor demand. And so, one thing I always want to point out is that automation, people kind of think too literally about instead of thinking of productivity growth.
yeah. And then there's a question of what happens in the entire economy, and I would argue that this is a question that economists in general have not, adequately thought through that they don't have the understanding right of how the dynamics would work. So one of the things is that, we have had productivity growth for the last 300 years. So there must be something in there that allows more jobs to sort of spring up to replace the ones that are lost. And there is basically product innovation. So if you think about it, from 300 years ago, 90% of the economy and 90% of the labor was agricultural. Now that part has shrunk to 1.6% of the economy. So what do the rest of the 97% do? Well, they do things that 300 years ago those jobs did not exist. There has been innovation where you come up with more stuff, more goods and more services, new goods and new services, um, to offer people, and that creates more jobs. So there is a sort of a semi balance between jobs being lost to productivity growth and jobs being created in terms of um, product innovation. And the problem that occurs is that the economy, goes into this semi-stable state where either like from the Great Depression to the 1970s, the product innovation was dominant, and you actually had labor income rising, you had spending rising, and you had productivity growth rising. And then you get into another state, which we have been in since the 70s until now, where the productivity growth is dominant. And in that state, the labor income for the last 40 years has been essentially stagnant, while the economy has grown about fivefold. So the labor income, it doesn't actually go down because of productivity growth, but it stagnates. So it's sort of, you can think of it as going down relative to an economy that is still growing, but right now it's growing, and for the last 40 years, it's been growing like the top half. It's the rich person's economy, like the top half of the economy has grown, and the wealthy have gotten wealthier. But the average American, the worker, consumer, the bottom 70% have seen none of that growth. And on the other hand, um, so they end up being left behind by the economy. And they what you end up seeing is that because of the way the economy is structured, you have inflation in things that are driven by debt, things like real estate and things like education, or driven by policies, so things like healthcare. So it's like everything else, they can sort of afford, but certain things just get more and more out of reach.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
What do you think,
Yeah,
Brian?
there's some other good quotes in this article. I like the part where they talked about engineers replacing tasks, not jobs.
Yeah.
Um, I thought that was a good point.
Yeah.
The
I
two
think.
were different.
Yeah.
And one of the things I loved about Medlock's tweet is that it kind of opened the door to like how a lot of people, they kind of think singular ideas of complex things that happen. So like a lot of people, what they understand is when they go to Andrew Yang's policy, they say, well, why do rich people get the $1,000? And then they also turn around and ask at the same time, well, isn't a VAT regressive? And so they understand that VATs are regressive in the zeros, like without anything else.
Yeah.
But when they go to fund a universal basic income, it's actually extremely progressive because the people who get the most net benefit are the people who didn't have anything before and aren't spending tons on the new tax system.
That's
But many people,
absolutely correct.
yeah.
UBI plus VAT works fairly well
Yeah. Another
for
example of
addressing economic
a little bit
inequality.
is that sort of slowing productivity gains, which Paul Krugman, I think it was this week or last week, talked about also, how productivity gains are actually slowing. So um, again, the the way it should work, the way people think it works, is that productivity gains will like most economists don't have the big picture in mind. So the big picture, if you do it right, is that if you drive demand up high enough, then labor wages go up, and then wages going up does in fact cause more productivity growth. It causes, so it's like you're driving wages up, and then productivity growth has to rise to in order to allow businesses to stay profitable, and so that sort of offsets that rise in wages in terms of the costs of the business. Um, but you need to drive the wages up to get the productivity growth to go up, so that you have high wages and high productivity, and that's good. But you don't want the in the current system, your demand is too weak. You're not driving demand high enough, but you still have productivity growth ongoing. You still have productivity growth ongoing, and so that just causes the labor income to continue to stagnate. So want you want demand to drive productivity growth. You don't want to not have demand and allow productivity growth to just keep on chipping away at labor demand and keeping that stagnant. And if you do that right, you get the high wages, you get the productivity growth, which you do want, um, and you get all of the good things, and you get rid of all of the bad things, including the stagnant financial capital in the world, which exists because wages are not high enough to allow businesses to do real investments. So as a result, all of this income that the wealthy have, it has nowhere to go.
I
So
think
in
this one's
that
kind of
bottom paragraph, it says, talks about a robot tax. You guys have any
Yeah,
thoughts on that? Or do you know, is South Korea, somebody told me they used a robot tax. Um,
yeah.
you guys know anything about that?
I don't. I don't think there's a need for it. And again, it's you have to understand productivity growth from a nuanced perspective, that it is only bad in the context of low demand, of artificially low demand, which causes the wages to be too low. In that context, it's bad. But you don't want to actually like get rid of the productivity growth, because if you get rid of the productivity growth, if you did that 300 years ago and say we're going to tax the heck out of all the robots and not allow people to build machines or anything, then all you do is you stop the economy, you freeze the economy at a current at a level of development, or you slow it down and try to keep it from developing. It's the
and what
opposite of what you want to do. You want lots of productivity growth, and you want to be giving consumer workers lots of money so that they can actually take advantage of all of that productivity growth. And at the same time, you need them to be spending that money so that people who do want to work will actually have something to do and will actually have something valuable to do.
Yeah, I
Because if
was listening to a guy named Ted Chang, and he talked about how a lot of the upcoming things that we kind of fear from technology is not necessarily that we fear the technology itself, but we fear what capitalism will do
yeah,
with the technology.
yeah,
And so in my mind, this makes a lot of sense with how capitalism is going right now.
yeah,
But if we had a system in place so that we can harvest some of the gains, um, it doesn't need to be a specific robot tax. It can just be a VAT tax where we're harvesting some of the gains or something else that helps harvest the gains. But we need to harvest the gains. We don't necessarily want to stop innovation, because then what we're doing is we're forcing more people to work awful jobs that could be taken away. When we get a robot to do a job for us. I'm an accountant. When a robot will do an accountant's job, I will be so happy because
yeah.
no one will have to do accounting anymore.
Mhm.
And it'll suck for me personally in that I won't have the income from my job anymore, but it is a benefit to society as a whole that we are doing these things, if that makes sense.
Basically, people are worried about automation taking away jobs, but jobs are actually really easy to produce. All you have to do is give people basic income, and more basic income people get, the more jobs there will be, because they'll spend the money, And whenever you spend money, there's always, something to be done to support that production, that spending. That, if you go to a restaurant and have a meal, or you buy some clothing, there's always something to be done around that. But you want the productivity growth, and you want there to be so much demand present that what happens is that the productivity growth, the automation, gets rid of all of the jobs which are like, could be done by a robot, and what you have left is all of the jobs which could not be done by a robot, which still need to be done because you have so much UBI, so much spending available to the consumer worker that that if you want to do something productive, there is always someone to hire you. Yeah, because there's somebody to spend that money, and that is the part that is missing right now. We're just missing the basic income. It's much more key than I think Noah Smith and most economists have realized. They really haven't put two and two together yet. Yeah. So hopefully they will sometime soon, and I guess that's all we have to say for now. So I hope everybody enjoyed it. If you guys have any last comments, or
Well,
Brian?
sure. Yeah, you say that he hasn't really put it together about UBI yet, and in fact,
Yeah.
if you scroll up, he calls Yang's whole idea pretty much unworkable.
Well, he does. Yeah, he says it's better than you think, but it could be better. Better
He
than
just he says
so much
it's way too big and we can't afford it. And so the only like
he says exactly where Andrew Yang's freedom dividend was not really workable, and
and he's wrong about that.
he is. So it's not just that he doesn't get it; he actively disagrees with.
Yeah, he doesn't get it. He doesn't get it yet. He doesn't get that there's no cost. The cost of the UBI is that the capital of society, the capacity gets utilized. So that would be a cost if we were already at basically 100%, or we were at the ceiling of full utilization. Then that would be a cost because something else would be sort of pushed out. By that would be competed out by that spending. But because we're so far below utilization, that cost is not a cost, it's a benefit. It's the benefit of actually running those machines instead of letting them sit idle. So he thinks it's a cost, and he's wrong. It's actually a benefit. So it's 180 degrees wrong. It's not that we can't afford to have it. We really can't afford to not have it. If we continue down this path, you get the bubble economy, you get the stagnant financial capital, and it leads to instability. Yeah.
All right, that was my final thought.
Okay. Very good. Tune in next time for more topics about UBI and UBI economics. See you guys later.
bye-bye.